Imagine inheriting nothing but your late father's abandoned diner, a crumbling building everyone else called worthless. You arrive planning to clear it out, sell the scraps, and walk away forever. But beneath the pantry floor, you uncover a hidden secret your father protected for decades, one that reveals the extraordinary life he never spoke about and changes everything you believed about family, regret, and second chances. Stay with this story until the very end, because what she discovers inside that forgotten diner will leave you questioning what a true legacy really is and why one small light stayed on for more than 40 years. When Benjamin Carter died alone in the corner booth of his weathered roadside cafe at 72 years old, it took his family less than 10 days to erase nearly every visible trace of his life. The little white farmhouse on Willow Creek Road sold before the flowers on his grave had begun to wilt. His savings account disappeared into paperwork before the funeral home mailed its final invoice. His pickup truck found a new owner by the end of the week. Every tool in his workshop was boxed, priced, and gone before the dust had time to settle. His son, Ryan, walked away with everything that looked valuable. His daughter, Sophia, inherited everything everyone else called worthless. An abandoned diner standing beside Highway 27 with half its roof covered by a blue tarp. 3 dusty boxes filled with faded notebooks, cracked photographs, and kitchen aprons stained by decades of hard work. And an old brass ring holding a handful of worn keys. Ryan tossed them across the kitchen table without looking at her. "Congratulations," he muttered. "You just became the owner of the biggest mistake Dad ever made." Sophia picked up the keys without answering. She had exactly $214 left in her checking account. Her restaurant in Chicago had collapsed 14 months earlier, taking her savings, her reputation, and every dream she'd spent 20 years building. Since then, unopened bills had piled across the tiny apartment she could barely afford. Every morning she woke wondering which would come first, the eviction notice or the electricity being shut off. She hadn't cooked a real meal since the night she locked the doors of her own restaurant for the last time. Not because she'd forgotten how, because every knife reminded her of failure. Every stove reminded her of promises she couldn't keep. And every empty dining room reminded her of the father she had stopped visiting while chasing a future that disappeared anyway. She told herself she'd come back one day. There would always be another weekend, another holiday, another phone call, until suddenly there wasn't. Now Benjamin Carter was gone forever. The only thing he left her was a broken-down diner that sat forgotten beside a lonely stretch of highway where fewer cars passed every year. Most people would have called it junk. Ryan certainly did. "Sell the fixtures," he'd said. "Maybe you'll get $400 if you're lucky." $400. That was apparently the final value of 43 years of their father's life. On a cold October morning, beneath a sky the color of wet concrete, Sophia drove 3 hours south in her aging hatchback, planning to empty the building before a salvage crew arrived. Her goal was painfully simple. Strip everything, sell whatever still had value, lock the door, walk away forever. She promised herself she wouldn't stay longer than a few hours. She had no idea she would never leave that place as the same person. The moment she pushed open the front door, an old brass bell gave a tired ring that echoed through the empty dining room. Then the smell hit her. Fresh coffee long absorbed into wooden walls, bacon grease trapped inside aging vents, warm cinnamon, burnt toast, old laughter, memories. It wasn't simply the smell of a restaurant. It was the scent of her childhood. The scent of a father who had spent more than 4 decades feeding strangers while slowly forgetting how to tell his own daughter how much he loved her. Nothing inside had changed. 6 worn booths still faced the highway. The counter stools stood perfectly aligned. Coffee mugs remained upside down exactly where Benjamin had left them. Even the chalkboard menu still hung behind the counter. Written in careful white chalk were the final words her father had ever left for the world. Today's special beef stew, fresh biscuits, and whatever you need. Sophia stared at those last 4 words. They weren't a menu item. They were a message she didn't yet understand. Within the next hour, while clearing a forgotten pantry floor that everyone believed was empty, Sophia would uncover something no one, not her brother, not the lawyers, not even the closest friends of Benjamin Carter had ever known existed. Hidden beneath cold concrete waited a secret preserved for more than 40 years. A secret powerful enough to rewrite everything she believed about her father. Everything she believed about herself. Because sometimes the greatest inheritance isn't money. Sometimes it's a promise. And sometimes that promise has been waiting in the dark for decades, hoping exactly one person would be willing to find it. Sophia forced herself to move. Standing in the middle of the silent diner wasn't going to pay the bills. She grabbed a pair of old work gloves from one of the boxes her brother had dismissed as junk and walked through the kitchen toward the storage pantry. By noon, the salvage crew would arrive. Everything that could be sold would disappear. Everything that couldn't would end up in a landfill. She intended to make sure there was nothing left. The pantry was narrow and windowless, lined with heavy steel shelves that had once held hundreds of pounds of flour, canned vegetables, and spices. Now only a few rusted tins remained. Their labels faded beyond recognition. Sophia began clearing them away one by one. She worked the way professional chefs always do, fast, methodical, and almost mechanically. Thinking hurt. Working didn't. The first shelf. Then the second. Dust filled the air each time another can hit the cardboard box beside the door. Her knees ached. Her back protested. Still she kept going. Anything was better than remembering. She reached for a 50-pound flour sack that had hardened into something closer to concrete than food. As she dragged it across the floor, it suddenly caught. The bag refused to move another inch. Sophia frowned. She pulled harder. Nothing. She knelt down. At first glance, the concrete floor looked ordinary. But years spent running commercial kitchens had trained her eyes to notice details other people overlooked. Near the back wall was a rectangle roughly 2 feet by 3 feet. The concrete there wasn't cracked like the rest. Its color was slightly darker. The texture was smoother. Almost, intentional. Her pulse slowed, then began beating faster. She brushed away decades of dust with the sleeve of her jacket. A faint outline appeared. Not a crack. A seam. Someone had hidden something here. She ran her fingertips along the edge until one nail caught against a tiny metal lip no larger than a coin. It had been painted the exact same dull gray as the floor. Invisible. Unless someone knew where to look, or unless fate decided today was the day it wanted to reveal itself. Sophia swallowed. Her father had never mentioned anything beneath this floor. Not once. She slipped her fingernail beneath the hidden latch and pulled. Nothing. She tried again. Still nothing. Bracing one knee against the concrete, she pulled with both hands. Click. The sharp metallic sound echoed through the empty diner. For one strange moment, she froze. The silence afterward felt different. Heavier. Almost expectant. She lifted carefully. Instead of concrete, the panel revealed thick steel underneath. A reinforced compartment had been welded directly into the foundation itself. This wasn't something someone built on impulse. Whoever created it expected it to remain hidden for decades. The lid rose slowly on heavy hinges. Cold air escaped from the darkness below. Sophia stared. Inside wasn't gold. There were no stacks of cash. No jewelry. No forgotten fortune. Instead, everything had been arranged with extraordinary care. Like someone preparing precious belongings for the only person they ever expected to find them. She reached in with trembling hands. The first item was a cloth-bound ledger. Then another. Then another. 4 notebooks in total, their corners softened by thousands of pages turned over countless years. Beneath them rested an old coffee tin that felt surprisingly heavy. Its lid had been taped shut. Next came a bundle of yellowed envelopes tied together with faded kitchen twine. Some looked decades old. Others appeared almost new. Every single one had been carefully preserved. Below the letters lay a green savings passbook from a small local bank. Sophia stared at it. Her father had only ever talked about one checking account. The one Ryan had already emptied. So why was this here? What else had he hidden? Her breathing grew shallow. There was still more. A thick manila envelope sealed with the name of a law office she'd never heard of. Property records peeked through the edge. Legal documents. Something important enough to keep beneath concrete. Then, at the very bottom, lying by itself, a plain white envelope. Nothing fancy. No stamp! No decoration. Only one word written across the front in familiar blue ink. Sophia. Her name. She hadn't seen her father write it in years. The handwriting stopped her cold. Every letter looked exactly as she remembered from childhood birthday cards. From lunchbox notes. From report cards signed at the kitchen table. Her chest tightened. She slowly picked up the envelope. It was lighter than she expected. Just a few sheets of paper, yet somehow it felt heavier than everything else combined. Outside, a semi-truck thundered down Highway 27 before disappearing into the distance. The diner fell silent again. Sophia looked around the pantry. The walls, the shelves, the concrete floor, nothing had changed. Yet everything had. She suddenly realized something that made goosebumps spread across her arms. Her father had hidden this beneath the pantry floor. Not inside the office. Not in a safe at the bank. Not under his bed. He had hidden it in the one place only someone willing to clean the diner themselves would ever discover. Ryan would never have found it. He'd hired contractors. He'd planned to bulldoze the building if necessary. He would have walked away believing there was nothing here except broken furniture. Benjamin Carter had known that. He had planned for that. Which meant this wasn't merely hidden. It was left. Specifically. Deliberately. For her, Sophia's fingers shook as she turned the envelope over. The seal remained intact. She hesitated. A strange fear settled inside her. Because deep down she already understood something she couldn't explain. Whatever waited inside this letter wasn't going to tell her where money was hidden. It wasn't going to erase her debts. It wouldn't magically fix the mistakes she'd spent 14 months trying to forget. It was going to change something far more dangerous. The way she remembered her father. And once that happened, there would be no going back. She carefully slid one finger beneath the flap. The old paper gave way with a soft tear. 3 folded pages slipped into her hands. Across the top of the first page were 6 words that instantly blurred through tears she hadn't expected to shed. My dearest Sophia, if you're reading this. At that exact moment, she had no idea she was about to uncover a 43-year secret that would transform an abandoned roadside diner into the greatest purpose of her entire life. And before the sun set that very evening, she would learn that the man she believed she had failed had never stopped believing in her. Sophia unfolded the first page with trembling hands. The paper had yellowed slightly with age, but the handwriting was unmistakably her father's, steady, patient, every letter carefully formed. Exactly the way he had written grocery lists and birthday cards when she was a little girl. She took a slow breath and began to read. My dearest Sophia, if you're reading this, then I've already gone, and you've done something your brother never would. You stayed. You rolled up your sleeves instead of paying someone else to do the hard work. That's how I knew you'd be the one to find this. Sophia stopped reading. Her father had known. He had known Ryan would never clean the diner himself. He had known Sophia would. A lump formed in her throat. She kept reading. By now you've probably noticed something strange. The place is cleaner than it ought to be. That's because Gus still comes every morning. He keeps the pipes from freezing. He checks the furnace. And every night, he turns on the lamp in the front window. Sophia frowned. The lamp. She hadn't even noticed it. She looked toward the dining room where a single brass lamp sat quietly in the front window. Its bulb was switched off now. Ordinary. Or so she had thought. She looked back down. Don't ever let that light stay dark. Her heartbeat quickened. Why would a single lamp matter so much? She turned the page. For 43 years, that light has meant only one thing. Someone inside is awake. Someone inside will open the door. Someone inside won't ask questions. Sophia blinked. She read the paragraph again. And again, the words refused to make sense. Who was knocking on the diner door after midnight? Why would strangers know about a tiny roadside cafe miles away from the nearest city? She reached for one of the old ledgers. Its cloth cover felt smooth from decades of use. She opened to the very first page. There were no financial records, no inventory, no recipes. Instead, there were names, dates, short entries, almost like a diary. November 12th. Truck driver. Engine blew outside town. Fed him meatloaf. Filled his thermos. Sent him on his way before sunrise. December 3rd. Young mother. Baby running a fever. Wouldn't accept money. Slipped $40 inside the diaper bag. Pride is just another way pain tries to stand tall. Sophia's eyes widened. She turned another page. Then another. Every page held another stranger. Another story. Another quiet act of kindness. No one had signed these pages. No one had thanked him in person. Her father hadn't written down what people owed. He had written down what they needed. She flipped faster. The entries continued year after year. Hundreds, then thousands. Some only a single sentence. Others filled half a page. Each one ending exactly the same way. Fed them. Sent them safely home. Her breathing became uneven. 43 years? How many people had walked through this diner? How many lives had crossed her father's path without anyone ever knowing? Then she found an entry that made her stop completely. January 18th. Her name was Emily, 26 years old. Bruises hidden beneath makeup. Sat in booth 6 until nearly dawn. Didn't need advice. Didn't need questions. Just needed somewhere her husband couldn't find her. Sometimes safety is louder than words. Sophia slowly looked toward the dining room. Booth 6. The corner booth nearest the front window. She suddenly remembered something from childhood. Her father had never seated regular customers there. Never! Whenever someone asked for that booth, he'd politely guide them somewhere else. She had always thought he simply preferred it empty. Now, she realized it had never belonged to paying customers. It had belonged to people who desperately needed somewhere safe. A chill ran down her spine. She kept reading. March 27th. Young man. Said almost nothing. Ordered coffee. Stared through the window for 2 hours. Left smiling. Sometimes listening feeds people better than food. Another page. August 4th. Veteran. Couldn't sleep. Made pancakes at 2:30. Didn't ask what happened overseas. Didn't need to. The stories blurred together. Not because they were alike. Because they revealed a version of Benjamin Carter she had never imagined. Her father hadn't simply owned a diner. He had quietly built a refuge. A place where people arrived carrying burdens too heavy to explain. And somehow, without speeches, without lectures, without telling anyone how to live, he had given them enough hope to continue. Sophia's vision blurred. How could she have lived her entire life without seeing any of this? How many nights had she complained that her father worked too late, while he was quietly saving people she'd never meet? Then she remembered something else. As a little girl, she used to wake during thunderstorms. Sometimes she'd look out her bedroom window and see headlights parked outside the diner long after closing. She had asked her father once why people came so late. He had smiled. "It's just someone who needed dinner. Nothing more." No explanation. She had never asked again. Now tears rolled down her cheeks. Not because he had kept a secret, but because he had carried it alone for 43 years. She reached into the steel box again and picked up the bundle of letters tied with faded twine. The knot came apart almost by itself. Envelopes spilled across the floor. Some handwritten, some typed, some addressed simply, "Dear Mr. Carter." She opened the first. "You probably don't remember me, but 10 years ago I stopped at your diner because I was planning to end my life that night. You made me a grilled cheese sandwich and talked to me about baseball for almost 3 hours. You never asked why I looked broken. Somehow that saved me. I have 2 daughters now. I never got the chance to thank you." Sophia covered her mouth. She reached for another. "My son graduated from college today. You fed us every Tuesday the winter my husband lost his job. We never forgot." Another. "You told me everyone deserves one warm meal without having to earn it first. I've spent 20 years trying to become the kind of man who deserves those words." Letter after letter. Life after life. Oh! Each one revealing another invisible thread her father had quietly woven through the community. Sophia finally understood something that stole the air from her lungs. Benjamin Carter had never been poor. Not really. He had spent his entire life investing in something money could never measure. And somehow, he had become one of the richest men she had ever known. Still crying, she reached for the final page of her father's letter. She sensed before reading a single word that the greatest secret of all had yet to be revealed. Sophia wiped the tears from her face with the sleeve of her jacket before unfolding the final page of her father's letter. She wasn't prepared for what she read next. "You probably think this story is about the people I helped. It isn't. It's about the man I couldn't save." Her eyes froze on the words. She slowly lowered herself onto the cold pantry floor, afraid that if she stayed standing, her legs would give way. The letter continued. 43 years ago, I was 29 and had just bought this diner. I was tired, broke, and trying to convince myself I had made the right decision. One freezing December night, after I'd already cleaned the grill and counted the register, someone knocked on the locked front door. Sophia could almost hear her father's voice speaking the words. A man stood outside wearing a thin coat covered in snow. He asked if I could make him something hot to eat. I told him we were closed. I told him to come back in the morning. Sophia stopped breathing. He smiled politely and walked away. The next paragraph was only one sentence. They found him frozen beside the highway before sunrise. A tear landed on the paper. Then another. Sophia pressed a trembling hand over her mouth. Suddenly, everything made sense. The lamp, the ledgers, the secret meals, the hidden savings, the promise. It had all begun with one decision. One exhausted young man saying no. Her father had spent the next 43 years trying to make sure he never had to say that word again. She continued reading. His name was Thomas Walker. He wasn't asking for charity. He was asking for one warm meal, one place to sit, one more hour out of the cold. I could have given him all of those things. Instead, I gave him tomorrow. Tomorrow never came. Sophia closed her eyes. For years, she had carried the crushing guilt of not visiting her father often enough. She had replayed every missed phone call, every canceled holiday, every promise to come home next month. She believed she understood regret. Now she realized her father had carried a burden far heavier than hers. Not for weeks, not for months, for over 4 decades. And somehow, instead of allowing that guilt to destroy him, he had transformed it into compassion. That realization struck Sophia harder than anything else inside the steel box. She looked around the quiet diner. Every booth suddenly meant something different. Every coffee stain, every scratch on the countertop, every worn floor tile. This wasn't simply where her father had worked. This was where he had quietly redeemed himself, one stranger at a time. She stood and slowly walked back into the dining room. Morning sunlight streamed through the front windows, casting long golden lines across the empty booths. She stopped beside booth 6, running her fingers across the smooth tabletop. She remembered countless evenings as a little girl doing homework there, while her father worked behind the grill. She had always wondered why he insisted on leaving this booth open after closing time. Now she knew. It wasn't reserved. It was waiting for whoever needed it next. She looked toward the front window. The small brass lamp sat exactly where it always had. How many times had she walked past it without seeing it? Hundreds, maybe thousands. Yet to someone driving through the darkness, it wasn't just a lamp. It was hope, a silent promise that somewhere ahead, a door would open. Without questions, without judgment, without shame, Sophia suddenly understood the words written on the chalkboard. Whatever you need. Her father hadn't been advertising food. He had been offering dignity. That was something no menu could ever list. A floorboard creaked behind her. Sophia turned. An older man wearing a faded canvas work jacket stood quietly inside the front door. His silver hair peeked from beneath a weathered baseball cap. He held the brim awkwardly in both hands. "I figured I'd find you here," he said softly. "You must be Gus." The old man smiled sadly. "I've been waiting a long time to meet Benjamin's little girl again." Sophia nodded. "You knew about all this." Gus looked toward the pantry. "I knew enough." "Not everything." "Nobody knew everything except your father." He walked slowly to the counter and rested one weathered hand against the polished wood. "I used to wonder how one man could stay awake half the night cooking for strangers and still open at 5 every morning." He chuckled quietly. "Benjamin always said he'd sleep when the road stopped needing him." Sophia looked at him. "Did people really come here every night?" Gus's smile disappeared. "You'd be surprised how lonely the world gets after midnight." He looked out the front window toward the highway. Truck drivers, runaways, single mothers, veterans, folks whose cars broke down, people running from something, people searching for something. Sometimes they only needed a bowl of soup. Sometimes they needed someone to look them in the eye without asking what they'd done. He paused. "And your daddy understood the difference." Sophia swallowed hard. "I never knew." "No," Gus replied gently, "because Benjamin didn't do it to be known." He reached into his coat pocket and placed a small brass key on the counter. "I've been turning that lamp on every evening since he got too sick to drive out here." Sophia stared at the key. "He told me one thing before he passed." "What?" Gus's eyes filled with emotion. "He said, if Sophia ever comes back, don't tell her what to do. Just show her the light." Silence settled over the diner. Sophia looked once more toward the glowing morning beyond the front windows. For 14 months she had believed her life was over. She thought losing her restaurant meant losing her purpose. But standing there, surrounded by the quiet evidence of her father's extraordinary life, something inside her began to shift. Maybe purpose wasn't something you built for yourself. Maybe it was something you inherited, not through money, not through property, but through an act of love so enduring that it continued calling your name long after the person who started it was gone. For the first time since her own restaurant had closed, Sophia didn't see an abandoned diner. She saw a promise waiting to be kept. And somewhere deep inside, beneath the grief, beneath the shame, beneath every regret she'd carried for 14 long months, hope quietly came back to life. Sophia barely noticed the tears still drying on her cheeks. She stood beside the front window, staring at the brass lamp as if she were seeing it for the first time. Outside, Highway 27 stretched endlessly beneath the pale autumn sky. Cars passed without slowing, each carrying people with destinations, deadlines, and stories she would never know. For 43 years, her father had looked at that same road and seen something entirely different. He hadn't seen traffic. He had seen people. People who might be one bad day away from needing someone to leave the light on. A knock at the front door broke the silence. The old brass bell rang softly. Another woman stepped inside. She looked to be in her late 60s, wearing a navy wool coat and carrying a leather briefcase that had clearly seen years of use. She removed her gloves carefully before speaking. "You must be Sophia Carter." "I am. My name is Margaret Ellis." She extended her hand. "I'm the attorney your father asked you to contact, if this day ever came." Sophia blinked. So he expected someone would challenge everything. Margaret smiled sadly. Your father expected human nature. She placed the briefcase on one of the booths and removed a thick folder secured with a blue ribbon. Across the front were typed words that immediately caught Sophia's attention. The Carter Community Trust. She frowned. My father had a trust. He created it 8 years ago. Sophia stared. 8 years. Margaret nodded. And he reviewed it every single year. She untied the ribbon and carefully spread several documents across the table. The diner. The land beneath it. The adjoining lot. The savings account you discovered. And another investment account you haven't found yet. They all belong to this trust. Sophia's eyes widened. My brother never mentioned any of this. He couldn't, Margaret replied calmly. Legally. None of it belonged to the estate. Sophia slowly sat down. My father planned all this for nearly a decade. She turned another page. Benjamin was very specific. She adjusted her reading glasses before continuing. The property can never be sold for private profit. The building can never become commercial retail. It can never be demolished. It cannot become luxury apartments. It cannot become office space. It cannot become anything. Except what he intended. Sophia looked up. And what exactly did he intend? Margaret smiled. She slid a single handwritten page across the table. Benjamin's handwriting filled every line. At the top, he had written only 4 words. The light must stay. Sophia began reading. This building isn't mine anymore. It belongs to every tired soul who hasn't arrived yet. She swallowed hard. The letter continued. Money runs out. Buildings grow old. Roofs leak. But kindness only grows if somebody keeps practicing it. Another tear escaped before she could stop it. Margaret quietly allowed her time. After several moments, Sophia looked up again. How much is left? The trust. Margaret nodded. The savings account contains $43,000. Sophia's eyebrows lifted. My father saved that $1? $5? Sometimes 10. For over 30 years? Margaret smiled gently. He believed generosity required preparation. Sophia laughed softly through her tears. That sounds exactly like him. There's more. Margaret opened another folder. Your father also purchased the empty lot behind the diner. I didn't know there was another lot. Most people don't. He always hoped one day someone might build a small garden there. A place where travelers could rest. Sophia looked toward the back window. She had parked there that morning without realizing the land belonged to them. Everything suddenly seemed larger. Not richer, larger. As though her father had been quietly preparing for a future he knew he would never live to see. Before Sophia could ask another question, her cell phone vibrated across the table. The screen flashed one name. Ryan. She hesitated before answering. What? I just got a phone call. His voice sounded different. More urgent than usual. From who? A commercial developer. Sophia remained silent. They're building the new interstate exit. They want the corner property. She glanced toward Margaret. The attorney lowered her eyes without saying a word. Ryan continued. They're offering $420,000. Sophia closed her eyes. Nearly $500,000? Enough to erase every debt she owed. Enough to buy another restaurant. Enough to start over. Ryan's voice grew excited. Can you believe that? It's unbelievable. We almost let that place go for scrap. He laughed. Dad would have never imagined it. Sophia looked around the quiet diner. At the faded photographs, the worn counter, the empty coffee mugs, the brass lamp. No, she answered quietly. He imagined something much bigger. What? It's not for sale. Silence. Then Ryan laughed again. Come on. I'm serious. It's not mine to sell. What are you talking about? Dad put it into a trust. Another silence. Longer this time. Finally, Ryan spoke. A trust? Yes. For what? To keep feeding people. Ryan sighed heavily. Sophia, you've been through a lot. I get it. But let's be realistic. $420,000 changes everything. She looked at the handwritten page lying before her. The light must stay. No, she answered. It changes nothing. It changes everything, Ryan snapped. That building is falling apart. It isn't. It will be. We can finally move on? Sophia's voice remained calm. I don't think Dad ever wanted us to move on. I think he wanted us to continue. Ryan let out a frustrated breath. You honestly expect to run a charity? No. She smiled faintly. A diner. A diner where everybody eats. Even if they can't pay. Especially if they can't. The line went silent once more. When Ryan finally spoke, his voice had become cold. You'll regret this. Sophia slowly looked toward the lamp in the front window. For the first time in 14 months, she wasn't afraid of tomorrow. I don't think I will. She ended the call. The diner fell quiet again. Margaret watched her for several seconds before speaking. Your father left one final instruction. Sophia looked up. What was it? The attorney smiled. He wrote, if Sophia says yes, she'll reopen a restaurant. If she says no to the money, she'll finally understand why I built this place in the first place. Sophia looked around the empty dining room once again. Hours earlier, she had walked through these doors planning to sell everything. Now, for the first time since losing her own restaurant, she wasn't thinking about what she had lost. She was thinking about what she had been entrusted to protect. Outside, another car rolled down Highway 27. It didn't stop. But someday, someone else would. Someone frightened. Someone hungry. Someone who had nowhere left to go. And when they did, the light would still be waiting. The next morning, Sophia unlocked the diner before sunrise. For a long moment, she simply stood in the doorway. The building was still silent. The booths were still cracked. The ceiling still leaked in 2 places. Nothing around her had changed overnight. But she walked behind the counter almost instinctively, her fingertips brushing across the worn wood polished smooth by more than 4 decades of hard-working hands. For the first time in 14 months, she didn't feel like an unemployed chef. She felt like she belonged in a kitchen again. Not because it was perfect, because someone she loved had believed she would return. She tied one of her father's faded aprons around her waist. It hung a little too large, smelling faintly of coffee, smoke, and detergent. She smiled through moist eyes. Guess I'm borrowing this for a while. Dad. Her voice echoed through the empty diner. It was the first time she'd spoken to him out loud since the funeral. And somehow, it felt as though he had heard every word. By 8 o'clock, Gus arrived carrying a toolbox in one hand and 2 steaming cups of coffee in the other. I figured you'd be here. Sophia accepted the cup with a grateful smile. I couldn't stay away. I was hoping you'd say that. He looked around the room before setting his toolbox on the counter. So, where do we start? Sophia laughed softly. The roof. The plumbing. The wiring. The grill. The freezer. The dining room. She looked around. Everything. Gus grinned. Good. Because I already called a few people. Before Sophia could ask what he meant, another pickup truck pulled into the parking lot. Then another. And another. By 9 o'clock, nearly a dozen people stood outside the diner. Some carried ladders. Others unloaded paint buckets. Someone brought lumber. Someone else arrived with windows wrapped in protective blankets. Sophia stared in disbelief. What is all this? Gus smiled. It's called returning a favor. An older woman stepped forward carrying a box of cleaning supplies. My name's Helen. Your daddy paid for my groceries one winter. A younger man climbed out of another truck. I'm Daniel. He got me my first job after prison. Another woman smiled while unloading flower pots. He watched my little girl while I drove my husband to the emergency room. Then a retired electrician lifted a toolbox onto his shoulder. I owe your father 20 years. Sophia looked from face to face. Some she recognized. Most she didn't. Yet every one of them smiled at her the same way. Not with pity, with gratitude. They hadn't come because the diner needed repairs. They had come because Benjamin Carter had once repaired something inside them. Now, it was their turn. The work began immediately. Hammers echoed across the roof. Fresh paint covered weathered walls. Old electrical wiring disappeared. Broken ceiling tiles came down. Dust filled the air. For hours, nobody stopped moving. Nobody complained. Nobody asked who was paying. They simply worked. Sophia headed into the kitchen. She rolled up her sleeves. The stainless steel grill stood exactly where her father had left it. Its surface had dulled with age. Grease coated every corner. She filled a bucket with hot water. Then another. She scrubbed, and scrubbed, and scrubbed. Each stroke peeled away another layer of years. Hours passed. Her shoulders ached. Her hands blistered. She didn't notice. She hadn't worked this hard since her own restaurant closed. Yet something felt different now. Back then, she had cooked to impress critics, to earn awards, to prove herself. Now, she was cleaning a grill because someone hungry would someday need breakfast. That simple thought changed everything. Near lunchtime, Sophia crawled beneath one of the prep tables to reconnect a loose water line. As she tightened the final bolt, something caught her eye. Scratched into the underside of the stainless steel was a tiny carving. B.C. Below it, another set of initials. Crooked. Uneven. Childlike. C. Her heart skipped. She reached out and traced the letters with her fingertips. A memory surfaced instantly. She was 7 years old, standing on an upside-down milk crate beside her father, holding a screwdriver she was far too young to use. Benjamin laughing as she proudly scratched both their initials into the metal. So someday, he'd said, "Oh, you'll know this kitchen belonged to both of us." Sophia closed her eyes. "I forgot," she whispered. "But you didn't." For several minutes she simply remained there beneath the table, crying quietly, not from sadness, from gratitude. Her father had never expected perfection. He had only hoped she'd come home. Late that afternoon, Gus found her sitting alone at booth 6 reading another ledger. "You've skipped lunch?" Sophia smiled without looking up. "I guess I have." He slid a wrapped sandwich across the table. "Benjamin would have yelled at me if I let his daughter forget to eat." She laughed. He really would have. Gus sat across from her. "What are you reading?" Sophia turned the ledger toward him. "There are thousands of names." He remembered every single one. Gus nodded. He always said people deserve to be remembered. She looked towards the front window. "I spent years chasing success. I thought opening the best restaurant in Chicago would finally prove I mattered. And did it?" She thought for a long moment. "No." "What about this place?" She looked around. Fresh paint. New lights. Neighbors laughing together while replacing ceiling panels. Theo installing new shelves. Helen washing coffee mugs. Daniel repairing broken chairs. Nobody was earning a paycheck. Nobody expected one. Yet no one wanted to leave. Sophia smiled. I think this place mattered before anyone ever called it successful. Gus nodded slowly. That's because your daddy never measured wealth by what stayed in his pocket. He measured it. Foan sorted to koksen man amorswan albiaf. Oder kontwan amprofan sa trekenpon amaf obias. Gentwan hunters oat. Owen unto the humble folk hanik what walked back out the front door carrying hope. As evening approached, the volunteers packed their tools. One by one they headed home. Before leaving, Gus stopped beside the front window. He reached into his pocket and removed the small brass key. Without saying a word, he handed it to Sophia. She looked down at it. The lamp? He nodded. It's yours now. Sophia held the key tightly. Her hand trembled. She walked to the window, inserted the key, turned the switch. With a soft click, warm golden light filled the glass. Outside, the fading daylight gave way to dusk. The lamp shone brightly across Highway 27, exactly as it had for 43 years. Sophia stood there silently. Cars passed. Most never noticed. But somewhere, someday, someone exhausted, someone frightened, someone convinced they had nowhere left to go, and because one tired father had refused to let guilt have the final word, that stranger would find a light still burning. Sophia finally understood. She wasn't reopening a restaurant. She was continuing a promise, and for the first time since losing everything, she no longer asked herself whether she could rebuild her life. She already had. It simply looked nothing like she had imagined. The grand reopening came on the first Saturday of April. The morning sun spilled across Highway 27, warming the freshly painted brick walls of the little roadside diner. The faded sign that had once looked forgotten now carried new life. In simple white letters, beneath the name The Lantern Cafe, another line had been added. The light is always on. Long before opening time, people began filling the parking lot. Not because of advertisements, not because of social media, not because of discounts. They came because they remembered truck drivers who had once found shelter there during snowstorms, teachers who had quietly accepted free breakfasts during difficult years, young parents whose children had been fed when cupboards at home were empty, veterans, mechanics, nurses, neighbors, strangers whose lives had crossed Benjamin Carter's for only a single night, but who had carried his kindness with them for decades. Sophia stood behind the counter wearing her father's apron. Her hands trembled as she tied the strings behind her back. For a moment, she closed her eyes. She could almost hear him. The familiar scrape of his spatula across the grill, the soft whistle he always made while cooking, his quiet voice greeting another tired traveler, as though they were an old friend returning home. When she opened her eyes again, the dining room was full, not of customers, of stories. Every face carried one. Every smile honored the man who had never asked to be remembered. Gus caught her eye from booth 6 and simply nodded. It was time. Sophia stepped to the front of the dining room. The conversations faded. I spent a long time believing my father left me an old diner, she began. I couldn't have been more wrong. She glanced around the room. He left me all of you. Silence settled over the cafe. The last year of my life convinced me that failure was permanent. I thought losing my restaurant meant losing who I was. She smiled softly. But this place taught me something different. It taught me that purpose doesn't disappear when a dream falls apart. Sometimes, it simply waits for us to come home. Several people quietly wiped away tears. Sophia continued. My father once wrote that kindness only survives if someone keeps practicing it. So today, we're not reopening a business. We're continuing a promise. She looked toward the brass lamp glowing beside the front window. As long as this light is burning. If you're hungry, You'll eat. If you're tired, you can rest. If you've made mistakes, you don't have to explain them. And if you've forgotten that your life matters, we'll remind you. For several seconds, no one spoke. Then, from somewhere near the back of the room, applause began. One pair of hands. Then another. Soon the entire diner echoed with grateful applause. Not for Sophia. For Benjamin. For a life measured not by wealth, but by compassion. Later that afternoon, after the lunch rush had finally slowed, the front door opened once again. A young mother stepped inside carrying a little boy no older than 5. Both looked exhausted. The woman hesitated just inside the entrance. "I'm sorry," she said quietly. "I only have enough money to buy one meal." Sophia smiled exactly the way her father always had. "You don't need any money today." The woman's eyes filled instantly. "I can't accept charity." "It's not charity," Sophia replied gently. "It's dinner." She guided them to booth 6, the safest seat in the house. A few minutes later, she placed a warm bowl of chicken soup in front of the mother and a grilled cheese sandwich beside the little boy. Neither could speak. They simply stared at the food. The little boy finally looked up. "Well, why are you being so nice to us?" Sophia knelt beside him. "Because years ago," she said softly, "someone taught me that everybody gets hungry sometimes." The boy smiled. It was small, but real. As evening settled over Highway 27, the last customers headed home. Sophia locked the front door, but left the brass lamp glowing warmly in the window. She stood quietly beside it, looking out at the endless ribbon of road disappearing into the gathering darkness. Somewhere tonight, someone would be driving with nowhere left to go. Someone would be carrying fear they couldn't explain. Someone would wonder if anyone in the world still cared whether they made it through another night. And then, they would see a single golden light shining in the distance. A promise passed from one generation to the next. A promise that refused to die. Sophia smiled toward the empty highway. "Don't worry, Dad," she whispered. "I'll keep the light on." And somewhere, beyond the reach of memory and time, it felt as though Benjamin Carter smiled too. Every one of us spends our lives chasing something. A better career. A bigger paycheck. A nicer home. More recognition. More success. We convince ourselves that if we can just reach the next milestone, we'll finally have enough time to slow down, to reconnect with the people we love, or to make a difference in someone else's life. But life rarely waits for someday. Benjamin Carter believed he had one more morning to help a stranger. That morning never came. He carried that lesson for the rest of his life, not as a punishment, but as a promise. Instead of allowing guilt to define him, he transformed it into thousands of quiet acts of kindness that no one applauded, no one photographed, and no one celebrated. Yet those simple acts changed lives in ways he would never fully know. Sophia learned something just as important. Failure is not the end of your story. Sometimes losing the life you carefully planned is the only way to discover the life you were truly meant to live. She thought she had inherited a broken diner. In reality, she inherited a mission. She discovered that the greatest legacy isn't measured by the money we leave behind, but by the hope we leave in the hearts of others. A warm meal, a listening ear, a simple smile, or a light left on for someone who feels lost may seem insignificant in the moment, but for the person receiving it, it can become the reason they keep moving forward. So tonight, ask yourself one simple question. Who might need your light? Maybe it's a neighbor living alone, a friend who has stopped answering calls, a struggling parent, a coworker carrying burdens no one can see, or perhaps it's someone you'll never meet again after a single act of kindness. You don't have to change the whole world. You only have to change one moment for one person, because sometimes that's enough to change an entire life. Thank you for staying until the end of this story. If Benjamin and Sophia's journey touched your heart, please take a moment to like this video, subscribe to the channel, and turn on notifications so you never miss another story about hope, compassion, and second chances. Most importantly, we'd love to hear from you. Have you ever met someone whose small act of kindness changed the course of your life? Share your story in the comments below. Your experience may become the encouragement someone else desperately needs today. And until we meet again, keep your light on. You never know who may be searching for it in the dark.